Happy Bloodsgiving, everyone. Thought I'd hop on here and do a special episode, kind of a more informal episode, thinking about Blood Meridian and family, and if the kid is able to find a surrogate family. I'm thinking about Blood Meridian's travesty of a Thanksgiving feast. This is when the gang rides back into Chihuahua City and they're invited by the governor of Chihuahua, Trias, to a formal dinner. Page 176. When the lieutenant invited Glanton and his officers to dine, Glanton replied that he and his men did not keep separate mess. The lieutenant yielded the point with a smile, and Trias had done the same. They arrived in good order, shaved and shorn and turned out in their new boots and finery, the Delawares strangely austere and menacing in their morning coats, all to gather about the table set for them. Cigars were presented, and glasses of sherry poured, and the governor, standing at the head of the table, made them welcome and issued orders to his chamberlain that every need should be seen to. Soldiers attended them, fetching extra glasses and pouring the wine, lighting cigars from a wick and a silver holder designed for just that purpose. The judge arrived last of all, dressed in a well-cut suit of unbleached linen that had been made for him and that suit him very well. Whole boats of cloth exhausted and squads of tailors in that fabrication. His feet were encased in nicely polished gray kid boots, and in his hand he held a Panama hat that had been spliced together from two such lesser hats, by such painstaking work that the joinery did scarcely show at all. Trias had already taken his seat when the judge made his appearance, but no sooner had the governor seen him than he rose again, and they shook hands cordially, and the governor had him seated at his right, and they at once fell into conversation in a tongue none other than that room spoke at all, saving for random vile epithets drifted down from the north. The ex-priest was sat opposite the kid, and he raised his brows and motioned toward the head of the table with a swing of his eyes. The kid in the first starched collar he'd ever owned and the first cravat sat mute as a tailor's dummy at that board. By now the table was fully commenced, and there was a tandem run of dishes, fish and fowl and beef and wild meats of the countryside, and a roast shote on a platter, and casseroles of savories and trifles and glazes and bottles of wine and brandy from the vineyards at El Paso. Patriotic toasts were drunk, the governor's aides raising their glasses to Washington and Franklin, and the Americans responding with yet more of their own country's heroes, ignorant alike of diplomacy and any name at all from the pantheon of their sister republic. They fell to and continued to eat until they had exhausted first the banquet and then the larder of the hotel altogether. Couriers were sent abroad through the city to fetch more, only to have this also vanish, and more was sent for until Riddle's cook barricaded the door with his body, and the soldiers in attendance took to simply dumping great trays of pastries, fried meat skins, rounds of cheese, whatever they could find out upon the table. The governor had tapped his glass and risen to speak in his well-phrased English, but the bloated and belching mercenaries were leering about and were calling for more drink, and some had not ceased to scream out toasts, now degenerated into obscene pledges to the whores of various southern cities. The bursar was introduced to cheers, catcalls, hoisted bumpers. Glanton took charge of the long canvas bag stamped with the state cartouche, and cutting the governor short, he rose and dumped the gold out onto the table among the bones and rinds and pools of spilled drink, and in a brisk drumhead disbursement divided out the pile of gold with the blade of his knife, so that each man was paid his spoken share, and no further ceremony to it. A sort of skiffle band had struck up a lugubrious air in one corner of the hall, and first up was the judge, who ushered the players and their instruments into the adjoining ballroom, where a number of ladies who had been sent for sat already about the walls on benches and fanned themselves without apparent alarm. The Americans debouched into the dancing hall by ones and twos and by groups, chairs pushed back, chairs pushed over to lie where they fell. Wall lamps and their tin reflectors had been lit all about the room, and the celebrants foregathered there cast conflicting shadows. The scalp hunters stood grinning at the dames, churlish looking in their shrunken clothes, sucking their teeth, armed with knives and pistols and mad about the eyes. The judge was in close conference with the band, and soon a quadrille was struck up. A great lurching and stomping ensued, while the judge, affable, gallant, squired first one and then another of the ladies through the steps with an easy niceness. By midnight, the governor had excused himself, and members of the band had begun to slip away. A blind street harpist stood terrified upon the banquet table among the bones and platters, and a horde of lurid-looking whores had infiltrated the dance. Pistol fire soon became general, and Mr. Riddle, who was acting American consul in the city, descended to remonstrate with the revelers and was warned away. Fights broke out. Furniture was disassembled. Men waving chair legs, candle stands. Two whores grappled and pitched into a sideboard and went to the floor in a crash of brandy glasses. Jackson, pistols drawn, lurched into the street, vowing to shoot the ass off Jesus Christ, the long-legged white son of a bitch. At dawn, the shapes of insensate toppers lay snoring among the floor, among the dark patches of drying blood. Bathcat and the harpist lay asleep upon the banquet table in one another's arms. A family of thieves were tiptoeing through the wreckage, turning out the pockets of the sleepers, and the remains of the bonfire that had consumed a good part of the hotel's furnishings smoldered in the street before the door. These scenes and scenes like them were repeated night after night. The citizenry made address to the governor, but he was much like the sorcerer's apprentice, who could indeed provoke the imp to do his will, but could in no way make him cease again. The baths had become bordellos, the attendants driven off. The white stone fountain in the plaza was filled at night with naked and drunken men. Cantinas were evacuated as if by fire with the appearance of any two of the company, and the Americans found themselves in ghost taverns with drinks on the tables and cigars still burning in the clay ashtrays. Horses were ridden indoors and out, and as the gold began to dwindle away, shopkeepers found themselves presented with debits scrawled on butcher paper in a foreign language for whole shelves of goods. Stores began to close. Charcoal scrawls appeared on lime-washed walls. The evening street stood empty, and there were no paseos, and the young girls of the city were boarded up and seen no more. On the 15th of August, they rode out. A week later, a company of drovers reported them investing the town of Koyame, 80 miles to the northeast. One of the things I like about this passage is that we wonder what the gang would look like in different circumstances. We see them at war. We see them, McCarthy's word is barbarous, riding through the streets of Chihuahua City when the kid first sets eyes on the Glanton gang. And we see them in the wilderness, but we don't see them in a social setting except for this scene. And of course, it immediately degenerates into debauchery and butchery and bloodshed. But the men of the gang don't turn on one another, because the men of the gang are like a family. They're not a family, but they're like a family. The ordering principle of the gang, we would think, would be the judge, that this psycho family has built itself around the judge, but we know that not to be true. Glanton is the ordering principle. Now, an exception to this are the two men named John Jackson, one white, one black. And when black John Jackson murders white John Jackson after their disagreement, there is no move by anyone else in the gang to try to prevent this or to punish black John Jackson for decapitating white John Jackson. So it's sort of like your drunk uncles at Thanksgiving dinner who stumble out into the yard to fight, and you're just going to let it go on, right? And they're going to do what they're going to do. But mostly what we see, until, of course, Glanton is killed, we see the men of the gang standing up for each other, literally fighting with pistols drawn back to back. Again, this is not a family. This is a simulation of family, or a travesty of family. It makes me think a little bit about the family the kid came from. We're told in the opening pages that the kid's mother dies giving birth to him, that the father has been a school teacher, which means he was, educated for the time. He's fairly literate for Eastern Tennessee in the 1830s and 40s. But he's an alcoholic. He lies around in drink and quoting poets. And the kid has a sister that the only thing we're told about is that he has a sister in this world he will not see again. There's no mention of the kid's father after he runs away from home. There's no mention of the kid's mother or the kid's sister. He leaves his East Tennessee home much like Cormac left his, to go to Texas, both men. And interestingly, the kid has a series of surrogates, right? Toadvine, the relationship seems to be one of younger and older brother. The relationship with Tobin and the kid is one of a mentor and a mentee, or a spiritual advisor. The relationship that the various members of the gang have to Glanton is that of the children of a tyrannical father. Though Glanton doesn't have to do much to discipline them. And then, of course, there's the judge, who is kind of a satellite to this gang. He orbits them in different ways. He's with them, but he is not of them. And of course, the moment that Glanton is killed and the gang dissolves, it's all up for grabs. And the judge is likely to kill various members of the gang as it suits him. Later in the novel, after Glanton's killed and the judge and the kid are being openly antagonistic, and the kid is arrested in San Diego, the judge comes to visit him. And the judge says to the kid, "Don't you know I'd have loved you like a son?" It's always difficult to say whether or not the judge is being genuine, honest. Something about that passage makes me believe that at least in that moment, the judge believes he would have loved the kid like a son. Of course, look at the way the judge has, quote, loved, unquote, the various children in Blood Meridian. What does a man do without a family? Historically, men have joined up with gangs like Glanton's, whether it's a motorcycle gang or a street gang or a military unit. Men have attached themselves to violent and wandering groups. At the end of the book, the kid is 45 years old. They're in Fort Griffin, Texas. The kid, now the man, meets up with the judge, and they talk in this saloon. And one of the things that the judge indicts the kid for is for not fully having emptied out his heart into the common lot. He's told him early, "You alone were mutinous. You alone reserved some corner of clemency in your soul toward the heathen." And then in the saloon, he gives this final lecture to the kid. And the lecture is, once again, this is a perversion of the idea of Thanksgiving, a perversion of the idea of gathering together and sharing with one another. The judge tells the kid this: "Where is yesterday? Where is Glanton and Brown? Where is the priest?" He leaned closer. "Where is Shelby, whom you left to the mercies of Elias in the desert? And where is Tate, whom you abandoned in the mountains? Where are the ladies, the fair and tender ladies with whom you danced at the governor's ball when you were a hero anointed with the blood of the enemies of the republic you'd elected to defend? And where is the fiddler? And where the dance? I guess you can tell me. I tell you this: as war becomes dishonored and its nobility called into question, those honorable men who recognize the sanctity of blood will become excluded from the dance, which is the warrior's right, and thereby will the dance become a false dance, and the dancers false dancers. And yet there will be one always who's a true dancer. And can you guess who that might be? You ain't nothing. You speak truer than you know. But I will tell you, only that man who has offered himself up entire to the blood of war, who has been to the floor of the pit and seen the horror in the round, and learned at last that it speaks to his inmost heart, only that man can dance. Even a dumb animal can dance." The judge set the bottle on the bar. "Hear me, man. There is room on the stage for one beast and one alone. All others are destined for a night that is eternal and without name. One by one, they will step down into the darkness before the footlamps. Bears that dance, bears that don't."